let's do a little bit of headstocking, some headstock repairs. Headstock videos tend to garner more attention for whatever reason. Maybe they make compelling thumbnail imagery, you know. It can be a catastrophic sight. And for the person who's looking at it in real life, you know, there's this instantaneous hit of regret. You know, when these things happen, well, just imagine your favorite guitar falling from a stand, or where you perched it precariously against the arm of your sofa and the cat comes by, and then there's this exceptionally loud sound. You know, it's a clunk, usually accompanied by the sound of strings. Ominous sound, a lot of harmonic content, it's chaotic, and then, well, you know, you can't pick it up and play it. It's done. So I've got two necks to work with here, and they're kind of on either side of the spectrum. One should be pretty simple glue up, and the other less so. This one might require a few more tricks. I've shown these things before, and I've had people ask about building the jigs I use, etc. In every case the answer is I can't give you exact dimensions because the router you'll be using will be different from mine, and there's a whole lot of variables. Guitars are different, every case is different, and if you're taking control of the situation and declaring that you are the one who's going to repair an instrument, it's up to you to measure, visualize, figure it out, and sometimes even test the setup and methods that you intend to employ, so you know they'll work for your situation. It's all on you, and you need to use your brain. This is not a how-to. This is you watching me do something. Maybe that will inspire you. I certainly hope so. But I'm not going to be in the room with you, you know. You wouldn't want that, you know, me looking over your shoulder saying things like, "Aw, you sure? Okay." That said, we're going to start with this nice Godin LG, which was kind of their take on a Les Paul special or something, you know, flat top, dual humbucker. They were spec'd out in a number of different ways, different models you could get from the late 90s to maybe, I think, 2010 or something. I'm not exactly sure. This one's from 2005. They're not making anything similar at the moment, but these were a real, affordable workhorse made in North America. Excellent construction, mahogany bodies. They have a flatter fingerboard radius. I think these are 16 inches. There's a lot to like about these, so they're worth a try. If you run into one in the wild, give it a shot. So this is what we might call a closed fracture. With string tension off, it's almost like it wasn't even broken. But it runs into the neck rather than into the head. And it seems to be angled quite nicely, that there's going to be quite a lot of surface area for glue to hold onto, and the stress is going to be distributed over a wide area with support from the fingerboard above. That's all very reassuring. You know, this should be good and strong. Other things to note: this instrument has a scarfed head joint. In other words, the piece of mahogany that makes up the neck was cut at an angle and reversed and glued on. You see, into the headstock area here, there's a line. And, well, what does that do? It basically puts continuous grain lines running to the headstock, but then doubles them up by reversing them in the area, in this case of the area behind the nut, which, depending on who you listen to, could be stronger. The other thing this has, as opposed to Gibson, is a shallower headstock angle. This one's about 12 degrees as opposed to up to 17 degrees. So that can sort of ameliorate some of the effects of the impact. We don't have short grain in this area just behind the nut. This is solid all the way through until about the, you know, first set of peg holes. And, you know, it is just one of those things. It's a design feature that when they do break, they tend to be a little less dramatic than the Gibson style necks. Now then, this here is a Les Paul from 1961. Yes, it looks like an SG, but it's a Les Paul. You know that story. If not, go look it up. This is not one of the modern reissues. This is a real deal. However, some slight modifications may have taken place. And of course, we've got this statement, which, you know, not the easiest. If brains are all you ever get, you start to wonder if you can have a change of pace. So lots of weirdness. Like this thing apparently at one point had a Telecaster route, a plate on there. And it was almost certainly like a Junior. There are two holes which have been plugged with honkin' big flathead screws. Was the original location for the wraparound tailpiece on a Junior? I don't think so. I mean, it shouldn't be. If it was terribly out of tune. But it's since been retrofitted with standard stop tailpiece kind of situation going on here. And something like a swimming pool route took place in the distant past. Maybe someone wanted it to be a custom with 3 pickups or something. This black is obviously not the original color. So was this perhaps a Les Paul Junior that was expanded and then restored to single pickup glory? I don't know. 1961 is a bit of a weird year for these because the lower end models, the Junior and the Special, examples exist of both the older 1950s style bodies with the rounded horns and such, and the new pointy SG shape. So there's lots of variations. Do the Godin first, tune it up to pitch, see if that can open things up a little bit more for us. This is one of those odd situations where string tension is both helping and hindering progress here. This is an incredibly tight crack. Even at full tension here, I can't slip a 1.5 thousandths feeler gauge in there. I think what's happening is the bass strings are clamping this section together even as they are pulling this portion away. So I'll likely take the string tension off that and see if I can find a means of maybe cranking this, twisting it enough to open that up that I can get some glue in there. I know eventually I'm going to want to put some clamps on here and the tuners are just going to be in the way. There we go. That's much better. I'm going to tape and glue a clamp block to the position around the first fret here. I'll wax off the truss rod to make sure that no glue gets in there. Plenty of glue in the crack though. I want to see that squeeze out. While that dries, I'll turn my attention to the Les Paul. I'm going to check each of the gluing surfaces very carefully so that there are no loose wood fibers or things that could hold the two surfaces apart. Like if the fibers are kind of bent or twisted or crossing over each other, it's better just to get rid of them rather than try and work around them. There was a little chunk here that was holding things apart, so away it goes. Should probably also remove the remnants of the truss rod cover and screw. That makes it hard to clamp against. And I've got these two things positioned exactly. I'm drilling 2 dowel holes all the way through. I'll loosen off the truss rod nut and remove that. I'll get rid of the nut as well. That's not the original nut. I have this clamping caul which has a relief cut for the back surface of the neck. Bunch of glue, pin them in place with the dowels. I'm not worried about appearances because both of those surfaces are going to get routed away. So I'll just slice them off with a flush cutting saw. Get some cauls on there and clamp it. And because of the dowel pins, the alignment was very good. I'll work on the broken section on the treble side. I've got a little routing jig here just to make myself a nice clean line for the inlay. I need to cut a radius on the end to match the router bit diameter. Just do this with a chisel and a sanding block. And paying attention, obviously. Is the rounded surface advantageous in terms of gluing? Maybe. But most of the strength comes from not the end grain, all the side grain gluing. Get that clamped up in place. And I'll pare off the little bit remaining on the top surface. I'm again bearing on the front of the headstock that is eventually going to get routed away, so I'm not too worried about it. And I'll pare off most of the overage. I'll sand using some 220 grit paper and refine the shape. I'll remove the half moon washer from the truss rod because that's going to get in the way. And I've made this routing jig, which has a step that allows it to butt up against the end of the fretboard and gives me a good base for my router. That gets clamped in place, and I'll excavate. Here I'm just checking an initial depth setting. And I've done the entire surface here except for the area around the truss rod where I did not want to run the router bit. I'll make up a plug that will go on top. The length has to be very accurately sized. I'll glue that down and then cut out the outline. I'll sand it. This is going cross grain. Doesn't really matter. It's going to get a thick coat of paint. And now I have to open up the truss rod cavity, trying to keep to standard Gibson dimensions and shape. Here's another routing template for the back of the headstock. In this partial backstrap setup, I like the line at the top to bisect the tuner holes. It disappears more easily because of the visual clutter, and also the tuner housings themselves essentially clamp the two parts together over time. I've pared the ends of the plug down close to the height of the original finish. This will make blending those surfaces together easier. Yet another clamping operation. Most of my clamping cauls are padded with cork so that they'll provide a nice even pressure. That's curing, so I'll apply a couple of coats of thin super glue over the cracks in the finish on the Godin. This will seal those up and make for a smoother result. Very gentle scraping is necessary. The finish on these necks is an open pore finish. I think it's a UV cured polyurethane or something similar, but there's just no thickness on it. They probably shot 2 coats and that was enough. So I got to be really careful. Just removing the stuff that's over top of the rest of the surface, and then sanding again will be very delicate. Look, Ma, no fracture. Yeah, okay. Polishing, polishing, polishing. The glue has had a chance to dry. People ask this kind of thing. To my mind, it has to be in clamps for at least 4 or 5 hours if you're using like a modern aliphatic glue. And then not stressed for the better part of 24. You want to give it some time. Now I get to sculpt the back of the headstock. I left the plug slightly oversized so I could plane flats into it and mess around a little bit. I don't mind leaving it slightly thicker behind the truss rod cavity. Now there is normally a slight swelling there because the headstock itself is slightly angled in thickness. It gets thicker towards the nut. But, I'm not going to put a volute on there and make it look like it's from 1974. Sacrilege. Do a bunch of this tricky pairing stuff, changing the direction which I'm cutting from one side to the other depending how the grain is oriented. And yeah, I mean, this is just fun, kind of. It's actually a lot of work. It takes much longer than you would expect. People will say, why don't you just, run a router with a flush trimming bit? No, not going to work because nothing is really at right angles on these things, especially when you get into the transition into the neck. It just wouldn't work at all. You'd end up causing more damage than help. So it's all got to be done by hand. See, on this side I have to cut the other direction because that's the way the grain runs. I'll start to employ things like metal card scrapers and dowels with sandpaper on them, trying to get these new and old surfaces to cooperate with each other. I don't mind that I'm losing a little bit of that black paint. It's very tenuous, very chippy, and by the time I've sanded, it's going to go away anyhow. So I'm starting to work in or define the point. There's a convergence that happens sort of, it's behind the nut, maybe a little bit towards the first fret, where these two lines come together like an arrow. More sanding. Trying again to blend the new and old surfaces together. I must tape any areas I don't want to sully with my dark paint. So this is the fretboard. Just put some tape on it. I figure it's a good time to drill through that section of overlay which is obscuring the tuner holes. I'm backing up my work so there's not a bunch of blowout on the other side. I'll apply a couple of coats of shellac to act as a sanding sealer. I'm going to mask off the area of the Les Paul insignia with a piece of paper towel. And then I'm going to spray it with some black lacquer out of a rattle can. This is Model Maker's lacquer. It's good, dense pigment. Doesn't take a whole lot to get really dark. It covers well. Okay, when that has dried a little bit, I can peel off the tape that's masking off the side of the fretboard and then apply about 5 coats of clear. Okay, this still has quite a way to go before it's finally complete, but I thought I should throw some hardware on there so you can get a feel for it and what it'll look like. These tuners are replacements probably from the 1970s. They've got a very old-fashioned Schaler S on them, and they were made in West Germany. So this had about 5 coats. I'll let it sit for a week, and then I'll come back and I'll do a preliminary level sanding with 600, 1200 grit paper. And that'll take care of, there's a bunch of orange peel and, little driblets and stuff. If there are any areas at that time that require filling, like I've got a little seam on the side here that definitely does, I'll use some super glue for a drop fill, level that, and then I'll apply 2 or 3 more coats on top, and then I'll let it sit for as long as I can, at least a month, preferably 6 weeks or even more, because lacquer continues to shrink for a very long time, and if you level sand and buff it out too quickly when you've got a repair that has 2 adjoining a plug in the original surface, eventually that will sink in and you'll see the line between the 2 of them. The longer you can wait, the more minimal the line becomes. And I got to do things like get a proper truss rod cover. This had something that looked like more of a Yamaha kind of thing at some point, but we can put the a more original looking one on. In terms of how it's going to sound, I'm sure it's going to sound fine. That is not a PAF. It's not the original pickup. So, it's going to sound like an aftermarket humbucker in an SG. Just imagine me playing some Angus Young. Plugged the Godin in to give it a try and immediately noticed a weird sitar-like effect on the first string. It's a strident little reverberation that kind of blooms. So I got out the nut file and made sure the string was coming off towards the front of the saddle. Much better.